And thank you. And if you have a minute, I'd like to ask you one question.
Sure.
You, of course, were just home in your district, and you traveled and talked to quite a few. Could you tell us a little bit there? Did you get a sentiment from your district on what they want?
Well, I spoke many places in my district, and I represent East Tennessee, which is a very conservative, very patriotic, very pro-military district. And I've said before that I think a strong national defense is one of the most legitimate functions of our national government. But we should not try to turn the Department of Defense into the Department of Offense and do things like that. And when I spoke and I told the people of my district what I had said on the floor just a few days before, that we shouldn't rush into war, and told them some of the things that I had said on the floor that I've said here today. I got nothing but applause, nothing but support. I've had all of my calls and letters that I've gotten have been totally against us attacking what Tom Aspel, the CNN correspondent, said now is a defenseless country. And I'm not trying to get any sympathy for Saddam Hussein. I'll say once again, you can say bad things about him. He's a megalomaniac. But the truth is, even if we put every single person in this country in the military uniform, we couldn't 100% guarantee that there wouldn't be some kook do something with a chemical or biological weapon of some sort. But we need to be a little more thoughtful in the way we handle some of these situations in the future, and I think not be so eager to show that we're a macho nation that and that and be so eager to go around and attack other countries. I don't think that's what the American people want us to do. And I thank you for yielding to me.
I thank the gentleman. You made some very good points. I would like to follow up on the one point with regards to the military. That is one of the most essential function of the federal government, is to provide for a strong national defense. But if we intervene carelessly around the world, that serves to weaken us. I've always lamented the fact that we so often are anxious to close down our bases here within the United States because we're always looking for the next monster to slay outside of the country. So we build air bases in places like Saudi Arabia. And then when the time comes that our leaders think that it's necessary to pursue a war policy in the region, they don't even allow us to use the bases. So I think that is so often money down the drain. It's estimated now that we have probably pumped in $7 billion into Bosnia, and that is continuing. Our president is saying now that that is open-ended. There's no date to bring those troops back. We have already spent probably $500 million additional dollars these last several weeks just beefing up the troops in the Persian Gulf. So the funds will not be endless. I have too many calls from so many in my district who serve in the military, and their complaint is that they do not have enough funds to adequately train. So we're wasting money in the wrong places, getting ourselves into more trouble than we need to. At the same time, we detract from spending the money where we should and training our personnel the way they should be. So I think this is not so much a tactical decision made by management as much as it's a policy decision on what our foreign policy ought to be. If we continue to believe that we can police the whole world and provide security and right every wrong, I think it will lead us to our bankruptcy. And just as was mentioned earlier, we receive the same time of grief when we pretend that we can impose economic conditions on other countries. We, as a wealthy nation, are expected to bail out other countries who have overextended themselves and they get into trouble. At the same time, we put economic rules and regulations on them, and resentments are turned back toward us. The Arabs in the Middle East do not understand our foreign policy because there have been numerous UN resolutions, but it's only this one particular resolution that we have felt so compelled to enforce. And the real irony of all this is that first, we use the United Nations as the excuse to go in. Then the United Nations gets a little weak on their mandates, and they themselves don't want to go in. So it's a UN resolution that we try to enforce, and then when it's shown that it is not a good resolution, the UN then backs away from it. So there is no unanimous opinion in the UN, I think, further proving that this is a poor way to do foreign policy. And those who would like to do more bombing and pursue this even more aggressively tend to agree with that. They do not like the idea that we have turned over our foreign policy making to an international body like the United Nations. So this, to me, is a really good time to make a stop and think, should we do this? I certainly think that our foreign policy in the interest of the United States should be determined by us here in the Congress. And then some will argue, well, it's not up to Congress to deal in foreign policy. That's up to a president. But that is not what is in the Constitution. Matter of fact, foreign policy, those words don't even exist in the Constitution. And the Congress has all the responsibility of raising funds, spending funds, raising an army, declaring war. So the responsibilities are on us. And this is the reason why I have introduced a resolution that would say that we do have the authority to withdraw the funds from pursuing this bombing. And there's another resolution that the gentleman from Maryland will mention here shortly, dealing with that same subject, because we do have the responsibility, and we, especially in the House, are closest to the people. We have to be up for re-election every 2 years, and if we listen to the polls that say that 70% of the American people want this war, at the same time, if we fail to go home and talk to our people and find out that most Americans don't want this war, and there's no good argument for it. The whole idea that we can immediately go over there and make sure there are no weapons of mass destruction. Well, we helped build the weapons up in the first place. And if we are really concerned about weapons of mass destruction, why aren't we more concerned about the 25,000 nuclear warheads that have fallen into unknown hands since the breakup of the Soviet Union? Our allies in the Middle East have nuclear weapons, and we have China to worry about. What do we do with China? We give them more foreign aid. So there's no consistent argument that we can put up that all of a sudden Saddam Hussein is the only threat to world peace, and it's in our interest to go in there and take him out. It just doesn't add up. If he really was a threat, you would think his neighbors would be the most frightened about this. And yet the neighbors are urging us not to do it. They're urging us to take our time, back off, and wait and see what happens. We in the United States so often are involved in conflicts around the world, and one of the things that we urge so many to do is sit down and talk to each other. We ask the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland to talk. We ask the Croats and the Serbs to talk. We ask the Jews and the Arabs to talk. Why is it that we can't do more talking with Saddam Hussein? Instead, we impose sanctions on him, which does nothing to him, solidifies his support, rallies the Islamic fundamentalists while we kill babies. There is now, by a UN report that shows that since the sanctions were put on, well over 500,000 children died from starvation and lack of medicines that we deny them. So I think that there's every reason in the world for us to reassess this policy. There is a much more sensible policy. What we need is more time right now. There is no urgency about this. We did the bombing in the early 1990s, and by the way, I can see this as a continuation of that single war. But since that time, with inspections, even the president claims that they have gotten rid of more weapons since the war ended than occurred with the war. So if there is no military victory in sight by bombing and only great danger, what is the purpose? Why can't we continue with more negotiations and more inspections? And they say, well, we can't trust Hussein. Well, that may be true. But looking at it objectively, when we finished in 1991, our policy was to encourage the Kurds and the Shiites to rebel. And we implied that we would be there. And what happened? We weren't there. Thousands and thousands of Shiites and Kurds were just wiped out because we misled them. Similar to our promises that we made to the Cubans in the early 1960s. So there's no, we do not gain the respect of the world by one saying, well, we can't trust anything he says. Of course not, we can't trust it. But we have to be realistic. Can they trust us as well? Because our record is not perfectly clean. I now would like to yield to the gentleman from Maryland.